Welcome to Mr. Haunt's dungeon, where the darkness comes alive. Dive into spine-chilling tales and eerie encounters that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you love the thrill of a good scare, hit that subscribe button and join us for new frightening and true stories. Don't miss out. Fear awaits. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get to the story. I know why people go missing on the Appalachian Trails. It was late October when I decided to escape the bustle of city life and retreat to a secluded cabin in the woods. The air was getting colder, and the forest was a palette of autumn hues, promising peace and quiet, far removed from the chaos of my everyday routine. I had found the cabin online, nestled deep within a dense forest in the Appalachian Trail. It was perfect, isolated, rustic, and enveloped in nature's embrace. The drive there was uneventful, but the road became rougher as I approached the cabin, eventually turning into a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for my car. Trees with gnarled branches seemed to close in around me, casting eerie shadows even in the daylight. Finally, I arrived at the cabin, which was even more charming in person. It had a quaint, old-world charm with a stone chimney, wooden porch, and large windows overlooking the forest. I spent the first day exploring the area, enjoying the crisp air and the rustling of leaves underfoot. As evening fell, I built a fire in the fireplace and settled into a comfortable armchair with a book. The isolation was comforting, and I quickly became lost in the tranquility. But as night deepened, the atmosphere began to shift. The once welcoming forest now felt ominous, its silence punctuated by strange, unidentifiable sounds. At first, I dismissed them as animals moving about, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. Around midnight, I decided to turn in. I locked the doors and windows and crawled into bed, trying to shake off the unease. I must have drifted off to sleep because I was jolted awake by a loud, rhythmic knocking. Groggy and disoriented, I checked the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. The knocking continued, steady and deliberate, echoing through the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way to the front door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. I hesitated, then called out, "Who's there?" No response, just the persistent knocking. Heart pounding, I braced myself and opened the door slightly, shining the flashlight into the night. The beam illuminated the porch and the immediate area, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. The knocking had stopped. I closed the door and double-checked the locks, feeling foolish but still unnerved. I returned to bed, my mind racing with possibilities. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it again, this time a scratching sound at the window. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was faint but unmistakable, like claws scraping against the glass. I didn't dare move, straining to listen. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Gathering my courage, I crept to the window and slowly pulled back the curtain. My heart nearly stopped when I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. They were set in a shadowy figure, its form indistinct but undeniably large and humanoid. Panic surged through me as I realized I was face to face with something that defied explanation. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp in my haste. The noise seemed to startle the creature, and it vanished into the darkness. Trembling, I grabbed my phone and called the nearest ranger station, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off, alone, and at the mercy of whatever was out there. The rest of the night passed in a haze of terror. I stayed awake, clutching a kitchen knife, listening to the unsettling sounds outside, footsteps, rustling leaves, and occasional growls. Dawn eventually broke, and with the first light of day, the forest seemed to regain its normalcy. The first light of dawn had just begun to seep through the trees, but the night had not relinquished its hold on my nerves. My hands shook as I brewed a pot of coffee, trying to dispel the remnants of sleep and the lingering dread from the previous night. The strange sounds, the glowing eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. The morning passed in a tense silence, and I couldn't bring myself to step outside. Instead, I busied myself with chores around the cabin, trying to create a semblance of normalcy. But as the afternoon light began to wane, the oppressive sense of unease returned, heavier than before. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Just as I was about to sit down with a book, the power went out. The cabin was plunged into an eerie silence, broken only by the creaks and groans of the wooden structure. I fumbled for my flashlight, my pulse quickening. As I clicked it on, the beam illuminated a shadow at the edge of the room. I froze, the light trembling in my hand. Slowly the shadow moved, revealing the outline of a tall, gaunt figure. The cryptid stepped into the light, and I felt a surge of primal terror. It stood over 7 feet tall, its body covered in matted, dark fur that seemed to absorb the light. Its limbs were unnaturally long and thin, ending in clawed hands that flexed and twitched as it moved. The face was the most horrifying, an amalgamation of human and beast, with deep-set, glowing eyes that burned with a malevolent intelligence. Its mouth was a jagged maw filled with sharp, uneven teeth, and it emitted a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the air. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. The cryptid's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of paralyzing fear. It took a step forward, the wooden floor creaking under its weight. The scent of decay and rot filled the air, making me gag. In a desperate attempt to defend myself, I grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at the creature. It shattered upon impact, but the cryptid barely flinched. Instead, it lunged at me with a speed that belied its gangly form. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground as its claws slashed through the air where I had been standing just moments before. Scrambling to my feet, I dashed toward the kitchen, hoping to find something more effective to defend myself with. I reached for the largest knife I could find, turning just in time to see the creature closing the distance. With a surge of adrenaline, I thrust the knife forward, aiming for its chest. The blade struck true, but instead of blood, a thick, black ichor oozed from the wound. The cryptid let out a deafening screech, its eyes burning brighter with rage. It swiped at me, and I felt searing pain as its claws raked across my arm. I cried out, nearly dropping the knife, but managed to pull myself together long enough to strike again. This time, I aimed for its head, driving the blade into one of its glowing eyes. The creature howled in agony, staggering backward and clutching at its face. Taking advantage of its disorientation, I bolted for the door, throwing it open and running out into the forest. I could hear the cryptid's enraged cries behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Branches whipped at my face and legs as I sprinted through the underbrush, driven by sheer terror. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys in my shaking hands. I managed to get inside and lock the doors just as I saw the cryptid emerge from the trees, its remaining eye blazing with fury. I started the engine and tore down the dirt road, not stopping until I was miles away from the cabin. By the time I reached civilization, my wounds were bleeding profusely, and I was barely conscious from the pain and exhaustion. I was rushed to the hospital, where I received stitches and treatment for severe shock. The doctors and police listened to my story with skepticism, attributing my injuries to a bear attack or some other natural predator. But I knew the truth. The glowing eyes, the unnatural form, the malevolent intelligence. It was something far beyond any known creature. I never returned to that cabin, and to this day, the memory of that night haunts me. The scars on my arm are a constant reminder that some things in the forest are better left undisturbed, and some secrets are too terrifying to uncover.